So festive greetings to you, IB Artists. This is Miss A, and today we'll be discussing I began the previous video on the process portfolio saying that teachers are very resourceful and that you shouldn't worry if your art department isn't super well equipped. And I think I kind of owe it to teachers to also say that, you know, IB schools should definitely be supporting their art teachers, their art departments, and our students, and you know, invest in that really kind of valuable part of the IB curriculum. It's really important that IB art teachers get the support that they need and that they're sent you know, for training, etc., so that, you know, not only do they get to meet lots of colleagues that they can then consult regarding, you know, whatever questions they may have, but they also you know, really become a lot more confident in terms of teaching and delivering the IB art course. I only say this because I have been teaching IB art for so long. A lot of teachers have reached out to me to kind of ask me about the IB art course. So I think it's really important to say that, you know, sending teachers out on IB courses to train them is really invaluable to their confidence and the success of, obviously, the students as well. So today we're talking about the third component out of the three. We've done the comparative study, we've done the process portfolio, so today we look at the exhibition component. This component weighs in at 40% out of the total. If you remember, the process portfolio is also 40 and the comparative study is 20. So in terms of the exhibition component, it is first marked by your teacher. And your teacher obviously should be very familiar with your work at this stage, but they're really there to authenticate your work, so make sure that all your references are perfectly clear, that everything is super clear regarding who the author of the work is, that there is no doubt as to what you made and what anybody else has made, what you thought about and what somebody else has thought about. And I say this because a lot of the time you might have been very inspired by a certain work or a certain artist, and you really should be referencing them. We talked a lot about how we develop our work, and I think this is very important to say that, you know, initially it was this idea by this person or this piece by this person, and I then kind of took it into my own direction. I'm kind of just stating the obvious, but this is really where your teacher assesses your exhibition component first before the examiners get to it, and while they're assessing it, they're also looking at the authenticity of the work. They are responsible for saying, yes, this is genuinely this person's work. If you haven't seen my video on how I mark the IB art exam, please watch it. It's actually very relevant to this video and the one coming. It shows you the other end of what happens when your work is submitted and how the examiners receive it and how they go about marking it. But in that video I have you know, very specifically said several times, I'm sure I'm repeated myself quite a few times, that the clarity of your photographs, the digital evidence that you're submitting, should be really as perfect or as near perfect as possible, because not only is the examiner basing all their assessment on the photos that you are providing, the teacher is as well, because the teacher is basically instructed to mark the work that you have submitted in digital form. So they, you know, no matter, even if they're very familiar with it, they are still looking at your work as you have submitted it digitally, right? So please, like I've said in that video, excellent photographs, you know, excellent quality. Make sure that when a person is zooming in, that, you know, it doesn't get all pixelated. You know, clarity is key. Also, please, please, please load them the right way up. Okay, you've already won half the battle, because in that video again I kind of talked about how cranky examiners are when they have to get through, you know, a lot of people's work, and it's a very responsible job. They don't want to rush through your work, but they don't have the time to fiddle around with your photograph and turn it the right way up, etc. Okay, so just be careful. So I've got my mic on now. Hopefully you can hear me a little bit better. The third component, which is the exhibition component, is the component where you have selected specific pieces for that exhibition. And for the SL students, that means 4 to 7 works. And for the HL students, that is 8 to 11 works. By works, I mean artworks, of course. Briefly, the way you go about selecting your work is basically that the pieces that you choose are obviously the most resolved pieces out of the bunch of work that you have done over the 2 years. I don't need to tell you, the more good quality work you have, the more you have to choose from. So, you know, if you haven't done a lot of work, then you are really kind of stuck with submitting the minimum. So also please understand that if you do not submit the minimum requirement, which is for SL it is 4 works, and for HL it is 8 works, you can't really score more than a pass on this course. It's not going to put you up in the kind of the high scores. So that's just something to think about. Just a quick word on plagiarism and the whole process of authenticating artwork. Unfortunately, I have been in this situation quite a few times where the student has told me that it is, you know, their work, and I very, very quickly can recognize that it isn't. Usually the students who do this are not very, are struggling in art. And therefore, usually their skills will be very, very limited. Their standard or level will be very, very limited. And, you know, when they do kind of present work that isn't theirs, it's usually work that is very, very strong. So as you can imagine, the kind of contrast between their very basic work and their very, you know, the very strong work that they're also claiming that it is theirs, really clash, and it's very, very, you know, easy to spot. So, you know, please don't assume that, you know, all art teachers are dumb. I'm sure you don't. But, you know, like I said, it's happened before. I also had a student, and this was quite a while back, I have to admit, but he literally copied a painting by Marc Chagall. And, you know, Marc Chagall is not, he's such a well-known painter. And if you have an art teacher who, you know, is teaching you art, the chances are that they will know a lot of very, very famous artists. And it was such a kind of, you know, it's such an unpleasant business trying to prove to a student that it is not their work. It was really just, it wasn't very hard because I knew the painting very, very well, and, you know, but the student was adamant, despite me giving him, you know, quite a few chances to kind of say, look, I'm sorry, you know, he just refused. And so make sure that, you know, you are aware of this. If you are desperate enough to attempt anything like that, you know, the odds are definitely against you, because there's so much emphasis placed by IB, rightly so, absolutely rightly so, that the work should be yours, that you are crediting all the kind of influences and starting points and inspiration properly, because you know, people just assume, though, well, it's just a work of art. You probably, as young people, you're most aware of this, the whole kind of copyright business, through the music industry, when people are downloading, you know, people's work. And yes, I mean, I understand, you know, if they're kind of multimillionaires and you just think, oh, it won't matter to them. It doesn't really work that way. It's still stealing, it's still dishonest. I don't claim to be perfect, but I think you should understand, again, that this is an exam and authenticity is very much a basic requirement for you to pass this course. So be very, very careful. Do not be casual about this. Okay? Once you have selected your artworks, you submit them digitally, and then the teacher will begin their assessment of it. And that's why it is not retractable. Once you submit it, you know, the final version, you can't change your mind, basically. The teacher is on a deadline just like you were, and so are the examiners. So that process is set in stone pretty much. The process of selecting the works should be discussed with your teacher. Your teacher should be the one to kind of recommend, perhaps. So, I mean, usually the students and the teachers have had a long relationship and a long kind of conversation, or a regular conversation about, you know, your work, etc. So by the end of the 2 years, just before the exhibition, you both should be pretty clear on which are the best pieces and which aren't. But sometimes it's hard to choose because there are two equally strong pieces or whatever. So make sure that you do pick their brain. You know, you should be consulting them for advice. Also, please remember that the same artwork cannot be submitted for any other component or your extended essay. So for example, you can't submit video for your comparative study and for your process portfolio and then use it in your extended essay. Even though this component is the culmination of the 2 years, it is, you know, 40% of your total mark, which means that you have to be aware that the exhibition component is extremely important, and that everything that you're doing in your comparative study, in your process portfolio, is leading up to this point. Okay, so make sure that you give it plenty of attention, and that, you know, you have enough time for the selection process, for discussing things with your teacher, etc., etc., and that you are aware, you keep it at the back of your mind that this is where all your work over the 2 years is leading up to. This is again also true for visiting museums and art galleries and art spaces, and you are keeping mental notes as to anything that is inspirational or useful to you as a way of looking and exploring the exhibition element for your own work. I have a video on this, which is tips for a museum visit, and I think it's good to be kind of quite organized when you go and visit these art spaces, so that you bring back lots and lots of valuable information that you can then use for your own exhibition component. You might have heard me talking about the bands of achievement in the comparative study and the process portfolio. Well, the IB actually calls them the level descriptors. Okay, so this is when your teacher and your examiner will be using the level descriptors to kind of see which one you fit into, starting from very, very kind of poor or basic to the very high scoring level descriptor. So that's the range there. Generally speaking, for the SL and the HL, the exhibition is basically assessed in the same way. If you take into account, of course, that the SL submits fewer final pieces or resolved pieces, and the HL students submit more artworks. There is also an additional requirement for the HL students who need to kind of elaborate a little bit more on the relationship between their work and the audience in the exhibition, in the curatorial statement. But we'll get into that a little bit later on. So for this component, you are submitting work which will be judged on or assessed on the technical competence, understanding the ideas, the processes and the materials that you are using in order to accomplish your intentions. You are also providing evidence on how you have arrived at these pieces, as we discussed in the process portfolio and the comparative study, actually more so in the process portfolio. And you are expected to somehow discuss the cohesiveness of the body of work that you're submitting, so how they all kind of relate, how they're connected, how there is a progression and a meaningful kind of focus in that connects your work together. You are also expected to write a curatorial rationale, and in that you are explaining about how you have thought out the audience's perspective as they view your work. And all these together are then assessed as a whole, and that's how you get your final mark. I talk a little bit more about this in the video where I'm marking the exam, but there is some text that should go with every artwork that you submit, which should include title, medium, size, and a brief outline of what your intentions were for the success of this piece. You're also required to submit 2 photographs of your overall exhibition. Please make sure that only the selected pieces that you are submitting for this component are in the photographs. So, don't put up your exhibition and then just like sneak in a few extras, because it will only confuse the examiner and they're not really allowed to mark them anyway. And also, please do not underestimate the importance of these 2 photographs, because it really gives the examiner a very good overview of your entire exhibition. It gives them a sense of how you've organized the exhibition and the sizes of your work in relation to each other, the cohesive threads through your work, the connections, and also perhaps how the audience is moving around in that space and perceiving your work. So they're very important and very useful. I have to say, as an examiner, I refer back to the 2 photographs quite a lot. It's quite helpful for me to kind of visualize the whole experience of your exhibition. Also, I would not, I think I've said this before in the other video, I would not include myself in them. It's just distracting. And you kind of want to protect your anonymity, really, your privacy, because you don't want people judging you in the picture. Like I said, it's just a distraction. I wouldn't include myself in the picture. Okay. For the SL student, the curatorial rationale is 400 words. And in this curatorial rationale, you are basically explaining how you went about exhibiting the work, the reasons behind why you have organized the exhibition in the way that you have. For the HL students, your word limit for the curatorial rationale is 700 words, and you are doing basically the same thing as the SL students, but you are also going in some depth into considering the audience's view and its experience of your work, how they get to engage with your work, and how your artistic decisions have been made and why. So you're kind of, basically elaborating in greater depth as to why you've made the decisions in organizing the work. So everything that you have done for the 2 components that lead up to this one, the exhibition one, is taken into account, and you are, doggies, everything that you have invested in answering the comparative study and the process portfolio, like the development of your technical skills, the development of use of materials and media, and of course conceptual development, the research element, everything that you have basically really done prepares you for this, for coming to this point, which is your final exhibition. Take into account the amount of art forms that you are submitting, that they, this is all to do with the process portfolio. You have different requirements. If you're an SL student and an HL student, you are expected to do a certain number of art forms and a certain number of types of art forms. We've discussed this in the comparative study. In all your best achievements in terms of answering the criteria should be presented for this component in such a way that you maximize the audience's experience of it, that you are communicating your intentions and ideas to the audience. If you are using, this is a very important point, if you are using objects in your artwork, so whether your artwork is comprised of many objects, or if you're using them in an installation, for example, make sure that you specify whether you have made those objects, are they made by you, or are they found objects? Bought objects, rescued objects, recycled objects, etc. So be very, very clear about what is yours and what isn't. Be very clear about what you have produced and what you have incorporated into your work as a ready-made object. Now, just a word of caution: if you are using ready-made objects, be very, very careful. Like with the collaborative work, it is very difficult to assess because you're being assessed, you're basically being assessed on how you have constructed the artwork, how you have put together the artwork. And of course, if it is very, very kind of conceptually advanced, etc., that's great, and you should be experimental and you should be delving into different areas. However, right, and this is the caution bit, you are still being assessed on the technical skills, etc. So it's very difficult to do that when you're just putting stuff together. For example, I remember a student that I marked last year put together, like when you looked at the photographs of the exhibition, they looked really, it looked like a high-end Saatchi gallery type exhibition. It was very, very sleek looking, beautiful, very professional. But at the end of the day, it was basically a student putting together found or probably bought objects in geometric shapes. And as seductive as that might be as an image, and it was great, it looked very, very good, this person didn't necessarily score very, very highly because there wasn't really much evidence as to how this person arrived at this exhibition. There was also very little evidence of this person basically the whole exhibition was a one note kind of, it was basically very repetitive because it was done, the same idea was done in many different ways, and there was absolutely no attempt on the part of the student to really provide any work that would address any of the other criteria, especially in the under the topic of technical skill. You get what I'm saying. It looked very good, but once you try and start assessing it, it's a person putting together a bunch of found or bought objects. That's not very difficult to do, and therefore this person didn't score very highly. So use found objects if you have to, if it's important to your concept, your artwork, but definitely use them with the highest of cautions, and use them very, very sparingly. I may even go so far to say, unless you're very confident and you're very comfortable with being a very advanced art student, I would probably avoid ready-made objects in my artwork, just as a kind of precaution, really. And of course you can completely ignore me because they are actually allowed. But I'm just telling you, from my point of view, what I would recommend to my own students. Okay? If you are referencing a certain artist whose idea or image you are deliberately, let's say, appropriating, or if you're using it and you're kind of, maybe you want to be kind of use it in a way where you're commenting on the artwork, perhaps sarcastically or not. Let's say if you have like that kind of Jeff Koons type of approach to things, make sure that the work doesn't just end up being derivative. And we talked a little bit about that in the process portfolio. And derivative really means that you are taking somebody's idea, and like with the found objects, you're not really contributing much of your own thought process or skill development process or anything else. So you're basically, if it feels too easy in the way that you are using found objects, or in the way that you're using somebody else's idea or somebody else's image, you're probably not going to score very highly, and that's probably a good rule for yourself to have. Another thing is, if you are submitting or exhibiting collective works, so works that are a diptych or a triptych or a polyptich, which means that it is comprised of many pieces. Let's say traditionally in painting you can have two panels that create one artwork, and that would be considered a diptych. Make sure that you are labeling the artwork as such. So in your text, put the title, and then in brackets if it's a diptych or a triptych or whatever. So make sure that it is clearly stated that this, in case of a diptych, this artwork is comprised of two panels or paintings or whatever it is. Okay, be very, very clear about that. Another thing to consider is that if that same artwork is very large and is comprised of many pieces, specifically two or more, then you might have problems with photographing that work. It may not photograph well, you might not be able to zoom into the photograph sufficiently enough. So again, make sure that you are considering these things and not making life harder for yourself by choosing these options. There is nothing wrong. I mean, again, if it is very kind of important to the concept that you're exploring, etc., by all means do it. However, consider how you are going to submit an artwork like that. Also, with the diptych, triptych, or polyptych, make sure that you understand that that is one artwork. If it isn't presented as such, you may, in some cases, if you've already submitted the maximum number of pieces, you may exceed that number. So just make sure that you understand that if it's a diptych all the way to the polyptych, make sure that you understand that it is one work. Of course, another thing is that a work like that will probably be time consuming unless it's small. I mean, it could be small. Again, another factor to consider. Specifically, people who are submitting fashion design. If you have designed something like a dress, let's say, or some kind of outfit, and you have not made that yourself, then that is not considered to be your work. You have to be very clear on that. You can submit the design as your work, but you have to specify that the dress or the outfit or whatever, if it was not made by you, whether sewn or constructed, it is not your work. So in that case, you can only submit the design, because that is the part that you have contributed to the artwork. I hope that's very clear. And again, that's probably not a good idea. It should be something that you have made. And I've seen incredible sewing skills, etc. on this course. The only thing I would like to say is that if you are going into fashion, you don't need to be making clothes at this point. Don't feel that, well, how can I go to fashion school if I haven't made any fashion? And the thing is, when you take your portfolio and you're applying for fashion courses, they're not looking for people who necessarily, I mean, some people are very skilled that way, but they're not necessarily looking for people who are already very skilled at sewing or any kind of sartorial skills or, cutting, etc. All that you learn at fashion school. What they are looking for, though, is, excellent drawing skills. And it doesn't have to be fashion drawing. It can be life drawing. It could be observational drawing. They are looking for a fluency in the way you use materials. Of course, the formal elements like color, shape, etc. And of course, concepts. I mean, look at the most successful designers that we are around today, especially. There's so much more to fashion now than just looking good. It's about creativity. It's about, inventing new materials. It's about considering the environment, so how do you kind of reuse the waste or minimize waste, etc. It is about the idea that makes something exciting, that makes something reinvented. These are the things that our fashion schools are looking for. They're not necessarily looking for badly made clothes. And let's face it, I'm not being horrible, but I've seen a lot of bad or just kind of really badly draped clothing. That's not what's going to get you into fashion school. What is going to get you into fashion school is if you do really, really well in answering the IB Art course criteria. So the technical skill, all of it, right? That's your aim. And you are not losing out by not actually making fashion. So trust me on this. If you insist on doing fashion, that's absolutely fine. Just make sure that you present very clearly what is your work and what isn't. I hope that was helpful. So for the curatorial rationale, I will put up a few guiding questions that the IB provides to help students write the curatorial rationale. And I think those can be quite helpful, but they're not mine, they are coming from the IB. As a summary of this component, the SL students are submitting a 400-word curatorial rationale. They are submitting 4 to 7 resolved artworks. They are including text with every artwork submitted digitally, which should include the title, the medium, and the size of the artwork, as well as an outline of what your intentions are for that artwork. You're also referencing in the text any starting points, any inspiration, appropriation, etc. of anybody else's work. Don't forget the 2 exhibition photographs that are a picture of a whole exhibition space, and that should not include any other artworks that were not submitted in the final exhibition. For the HL students, it is basically the same, apart from their curatorial rationale is 700 words, which means that they go into greater depth as to the decisions behind the curation of the exhibition. They're also talking more about how they view the audience's engagement with the artwork. The number of pieces submitted for HL students is 8 to 11 artworks. I've already said about the importance of how the digital format of what you're submitting really needs to be of excellent quality, because that is the only thing that the examiner sees of your work, and the assessment is purely based on the digital submissions that you have provided. So make sure that the pictures are super clear, that the videos are restricted to 5 minutes, that there is no sound in the video. Just think about what is appropriate for what kind of artwork. So obviously 2D, a still photograph might be a better option. For anything three-dimensional, a video, the examiner gets to see it from all sides. If you are submitting other types of digital work, like animation or other types of screen-based work, make sure that everything you are submitting is the correct file. You should be discussing this with your teacher, the right format, the right file, and if you want to check that out for yourself, it should be in the handbook of the procedures of the IB diploma program. And you should be able to get that from your teacher or your IB coordinator. Okay, so last 2 points are basically, for every artwork you are allowed to include 2 additional photographs of that one and the same artwork. So for example, if you have a painting, you will submit a photograph of that painting. You are also allowed to submit 2 additional photographs of that same painting. And that is because, for example, you may want to zoom in on the texture or some kind of detail that you are, you think is important for the examiner to see. Please do not abuse this option, because a lot of the time, I'm not sure what it is, maybe perhaps psychologically, some students think that if I provide more photographs, I'll score higher mark. It really doesn't work like that. Use that option sparingly. If the worst thing you can do is keep repeating the same photograph, because it's confusing, it's time consuming, and it's kind of annoying, really. So if those 2 additional photographs that you are submitting are not doing a specific job, don't do it, okay? However, like I said, if you feel that they are really important and crucial, then you obviously feel free. Another important thing about the photographs is if for some reason, and I'm not sure why this happens, but if you are framing your artwork and you're putting it under glass, or not, if whether you're putting it under glass or not, if you're simply framing the object, make sure that you take the photograph beforehand. Frames can be distracting. Then you have to kind of specify what is your artwork, what isn't. Is it part of the artwork? And also the glass can be very difficult to photograph because it is reflective, obviously. So any artwork that you're thinking of framing, make sure you take that photograph before you put it in that frame. Exceeding the number of words, exceeding the number of artworks that are permissible is not going to do you any favors. It may annoy the examiner. They are instructed to ignore them. So make sure that you are following instructions, that all the requirements are ticked, that everything is super clear, that you are sticking to the limits, and you're good to go. You have a good feeling after you've done everything you can possibly do to ensure that your work is getting judged not only fairly, but that you're really showing it in its best light. Right, so that's enough from me. I'm Miss A. I hope this has been helpful to you. It would be great to hear from you. I would love to find out more about what your questions are. If there are any specific topics that you would like me to cover, please put that in the comments below so that I can plan future videos. Otherwise, I hope you're using these holidays constructively. I wish you all the very, very, very best. Make sure that you're getting some fun in as well. That's very, very important. But hey, art is always fun, right? Right. Okay, so enough from me. One little thing, if you can indulge me, I know you guys are awesome, but just on a personal note, please remember that animals are not things. They have feelings, they have needs, they are a responsibility. They are not things that you gift to other people. If you are thinking of getting a lovely pet, make sure that the animal is, first of all, suitable to be a pet, and that you can provide for all its needs, etc. And that if you are thinking of getting one for yourself, you are only going to rescue centers. There is absolutely no point in subjecting millions and millions of animals to torture, basically, for absolutely no reason. I only say this because I've been involved with rescuing animals for at least 25 years and I've seen it all. So as a personal favor to me, please make sure that you are aware of what being a responsible pet owner really means before you make any decisions. You know, especially if you're kind of 5 minutes away from going to college or university. Right, love you loads. Thank you for listening to my little preaching rant. I hope you didn't mind, and I wish you all the very, very best. See you in the new year.